call the Parking Garage Task Force meeting to order at 9 a.m. on Friday, January 12th, 2009.
January?
2019, July 12th, 2019. I'm off.
We can only hope.
We go around the table and introduce ourselves. Roll call. I'm Sharon Lynn, City Manager.
I'm John Meng, representing the Fire Department.
Kathy Oster, Home Streets and Transportation.
Linda Kaufman, Parking Committee.
Mark Saunders, Homeowners Association.
Edward Schnowski, Main Street and resident.
Bob Cartwright, representing the businesses.
Steve Sheffer, Commissioner.
Carol Everhart, Rehoboth Dewey Chamber.
Okay, Carol, we can fit you in here.
I was gonna say,
Please
bring a
come
chair up. Because there'll probably be more coming.
More people if we need.
You can all sit down.
Yeah,
that?
put that one down.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, we have approval of the minutes, meeting held on May 3rd, 2019. Anyone wish to?
So moved.
Okay, Bob, thank you.
Second.
Second, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And meeting held on June 7th, 2019.
So moved.
Bob, thank you.
Comment about it?
Yes.
Just for clarification, vote to move forward with this. I guess I'd like maybe for the minutes, at least clarification of what this is. And I think what it is recommending to the commissioners that we did an RFP.
Right.
So maybe just clarifying that.
Yep, we'll edit that. Yep, thank you. With that one clarification. Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you. Any correspondence? None that I know of, Margaret?
No.
Okay, thank you. Old business, continuation of discussion from our meeting held on June 7th. And as we talked about the recommendation and approval to move this forward into an RFP form, make that recommendation to the commissioners. What I brought up is the fact that we have infrastructure under the new parking lot behind the fire department for the convention center. So all of that infrastructure was designed and placed 2 years ago. So I have two representatives from the city here today, Director of Public Works Kevin Williams and the IT Director Max Hamby. So if you can come up and present your findings, just so the committee gets an idea of exactly what we have under the parking lot.
Oh, no. Must be an IT problem.
And left before she could turn on the screens for me, so. They coming on? Now we may-
There it is.
Oh, there it is.
Thanks, Max.
So to begin with, I'll just speak to the electrical infrastructure. I'll let Kevin talk more about the other conditions on the site. But essentially, I guess the major impact that we would have regarding the city if we began to construct the parking garage is, as you can see here, these two lines right here are two 4-inch conduits that contain fiber that connect the city hall to the water tower. So we've structured our communications so that our water towers are our communication hubs, obviously the highest point in the city. We have line of sight between them. So we run a great deal of communications through them. Actually, almost all of our communications go through these two fiber runs. The other other services that use those connections are our 911 center to connect to the radio, since that is a tower site for the 800 megahertz system. So in effect, if construction starts there, we are going to have to probably fold down our 911 center and then relocate back to Sussex County if they allow us to do so. And then once again, we'll have to find some other way to reconnect to the water tower. So that, and of course, we have all the site lighting. We have fiber throughout the parking lot that connect up to cameras here and also here. And then also we have, as part of those radio communications for 911, we are also connected by fiber through the parking lot to the fire department directly. That allows us to do the paging, that allows us to dispatch to them a little bit easier, and that is all by design, so.
And essentially, Max, that is the city's entire communication system, is that right?
That's correct. It connects us out to our public works facilities, it connects us to our beach patrol and our boardwalk cameras, it connects us to our, the recycling center, the wastewater treatment plant, our entire SCADA network. The list goes on, so.
So, sort of on a scale of 1 to 10, two questions actually. Is it something that can be temporarily located while, substructure work is being done? Or if not, secondly, what is, 1 to 10, what's the level of challenge that brings to putting a facility in this lot?
It's a 10. I mean, I'm not sure where we would reroute it, considering that we're, completely, opposite of where we need it to be if we can't go through the parking lot. At that point, we're off the reservation, off our lot, so to speak. And we do not have conduit that will allow us to run that fiber elsewhere. So we would be, I guess we'd be attempting to contract that with Verizon or Comcast or whoever else has that fiber infrastructure that we could route around.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Do
I'm
you know, Max, did you give that information at Colonial Parking? Are the cost of this included in their financial analysis, which is $950,000?
Nobody's ever reached out to us at all.
So the answer is no, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, so when that was done, that was completed basically with, what could be done without looking at the infrastructure. And of course, that's why, it was important to bring it up at the last meeting, because this is a huge issue. We planned for this during construction, right, Max?
That's correct.
And the other issue that we have is stormwater. So I don't know if you're doing that or Kevin.
I'll let Kevin speak to that. Yep. And there's another page too.
See some of this. So, but if you look at kind of this dotted line, those are some of the underground storm drain lines that run underneath the parking lot. And they run out, some run out here to 2nd Street down to Lake Gerard, some run out ultimately to Rehoboth Avenue and down to the ocean. All of that can be engineered and redesigned to take it elsewhere and to do that, but obviously a cost associated with doing that. The other thing from a public works perspective is we need to maintain access to the water tower. Every 5-6 years, we have to sandblast and repaint that water tower in order to do that. It's a train of equipment, probably 2 or 3 buses long, that spray the sandblast and suck the sand back in. And we'd have to have an arrangement somehow that they can either save us space for them here in this current parking lot, or that we would have to close 2nd Street for an extended period of time while that was going on so they could access it from 2nd Street. So again, things that can probably be engineered, but we just need to take that into consideration to whether or not we want to could cause those impacts.
What's a considerable amount of time?
3 to 4 weeks. Mhm. And it would, I say close, I mean, we could maintain one lane probably on Second Street through duration, but it would take up clearly all that parking lane and then the one traffic lane to fit all that equipment in it for the period of time they're sandblasting and painting.
Thank you, Kevin. Any other impediments that other than communications and the stormwater?
No, just to add to Kevin's requirement about access to the water tower, we have Verizon on that water tower as well. We also have, as I said before, it's a tower site for the 800 megahertz system from state radio. They sometimes have to provide maintenance. Verizon certainly will have to provide maintenance as it's a temporary installation. If that goes to a permanent installation, they will still be required to have the same sort of access, which requires a large lift to gain access to the campus. So we're talking about possible road closures more frequently than every 5 to 6 years.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments about that?
How do you go about getting a cost on that?
No?
I think you include that information in the RFP, and the costs associated with rerouting or maintaining that infrastructure is going to be up to the folks that are willing to build a garage and pay for it.
I have a question. I'm hearing storm sewer probably could be rerouted, but on the 1 to 10, 10 being the difficulty, Max, I mean, realistically, can it even be done and maintain the responsible service that we need to do?
As I said, I think we'd probably look at having to fold down the 911 center.
What's that mean, fold down?
We would actually shut down the center here, and we would relocate back to Sussex County if they would have us, which is exactly what we had to do during the construction of City Hall.
For a temporary, until it was,
Until construction was complete, yes. 2 years.
Any fire services involved with that, Max? Communication?
Once again, depending on how far the construction comes out, it could potentially interrupt our connection to, well, actually, there could be possible interruptions in the fire service. Because once again, we ran into issues when we were out at Sussex County with paging with the fire system, so with the local fire department. So it's something that we rely on that connection directly to them. If that had to be removed or was impacted, I think that we'd be in the same situation we were in when they were over at Sussex, which had degraded paging services.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, let's put it in form of a question. What would your recommendation be as a person who knows far more about this than the rest of us as far as how that whole conduit system works? Would you recommend leaving it as it is, or would you recommend?
Yeah, that's kind of putting you on the spot, Max, but,
I understand that you're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place.
I understand.
I'm sorry.
I'll try to answer you. And so, we've kind of, now that we're in the building, we went through the construction process. We've got what we needed to make it what we wanted it to be. We've kind of hit our stride. If I had my option, we'd leave it alone and we continue moving forward. Otherwise, we're putting the brakes on, and we're band-aiding some stuff and trying to work around some issues for a while.
All of this is over 2 4-inch piece of conduit?
More, not necessarily the conduit, more so the fiber that's running through it.
Okay, well, it would be up to Colonial or the different people that do the RFP to provide them with information how they're going to build the garage around the conduit. Just put down that it can't be disturbed, period. It's great. I mean, I appreciate you bringing that information forward, but, the size of a parking garage versus 8 inches of conduit, just put it in that they can't disturb it. That's been a period, they gotta build it around it.
Can you bring that picture back
I
up?
think you don't, I'm sorry, sir, but
Yeah, go ahead.
these are things that it's not a situation where if it got cut, oops. This is a thing that if it gets cut, there's no more 911 in the city. And it doesn't take much to, to have an accident, to be perfectly honest. So if we were going to do construction there for safety, we would actually fold down the 911 center until it was routed around, or if it could be routed around, so.
Is there a cost to the 911 center moving to Sussex County?
Sussex County has worked with us in the past. I'm not sure that they would charge us to be there, but that's something I'd have to look at to go back.
It's not as an efficient system as what I'm understanding.
We're limping along at that point, so.
And so what, and to his point, what's the possibility, and I appreciate that you don't want an accident because, when you're digging, things happen, but of rerouting it around other property, potentially with cooperation of the fire department or even neighbors or whatever, and putting it on a rerouted system until the construction was done?
Depends on where it is, but yes, it could be done. I'm not saying it can't be done.
So, from a staging standpoint, could you reroute it and make a switch over without having to go to the county?
It's possible, yes. I'm not sure where it would go because I haven't seen a design for the
I
garage.
don't know either. I'm just
So
trying to look at ways around it.
all I know is that we do not have fiber or we do not have conduit off the site. So I'm not sure where we would put it.
Could they temporarily go overhead? While it's under construction,
I would
temporarily
not.
run it overhead?
I'm not sure where I guess we could, but I'm not sure where we would run it.
Yeah,
once
so
again-
the
once again,
purpose of this
it's a
was
design
just,
issue.
I brought it up the last meeting, we do have infrastructure. The question was asked, what kind of infrastructure, let's bring it back, and that's the reason why I brought Director of Public Works and the IT Director here, who obviously were, not so much Kevin, as he wasn't part of the plan of the building, but Max certainly knows every in and out connectivity and what's there, because he was a big part of that. And certainly communications is, with emergency services, very essential, and it's problematic. Nothing, everything can be worked around, so certainly there's a workaround. We can, include that in the RFP, and it would be up to any outside, business entity to have to deal with that. I assume, do that frequently.
Sharon, if we needed a plan B, we were going to do a one-story garage, would it still require the disruption of all these
Absolutely.
services?
Yeah, infrastructure. So my point of asking the questions was to find out if it's, do we stop meeting and say it's an impossibility, or do you figure out how to move forward? And what I'm hearing is there's gonna be costs associated with it. Could be temporary, it could be rerouted, it could be the city going to the county or whatever. But I think our job is to outline as many pros and cons as possible and get as much information into the RFP as possible to determine at the end of all of this if it's even feasible. So, my first reaction as I was listening was, just found a new thing for one Friday a month because we wouldn't be meeting. But I think what I'm hearing is it's certainly something that has to be considered. It's probably going to increase the cost, whether that's something people are willing to do or not. But getting it into the RFP is probably the best way to determine any of those things.
Well, and you'll have to bring that forward certainly to the commissioners, so, and include that, this piece of information that we have here today, and obviously the commissioners make that decision as to whether or not to actually, go forward with the RFP.
So that brings up a procedural question. Are we going to develop the RFP and they have to actually approve the RFP? Or are we trying to develop the RFP with all of these issues so that they approve whether to move forward or not?
So I would recommend, this is our maybe fourth meeting. I think, regroup and take what we know now to the commissioners and kind of give them an update. I like to do that just so we're not meeting in a vacuum, and, you know, we present that information to the commissioners as a whole and see where they stand on this, whether or not we're, you know, a microcosm of the commissioners. We can't really, you know, move forward without their approval. So I would recommend we formulate some key points to bring to the commissioners and have them decide where we go from here. They think it's worthy of continuation, or you know, where they want to go.
In conjunction with that, I hope that we'll still continue to do a need evaluation. I know just informally, I've walked the garage or the parking lot 20 times since our last meeting, and the only time it's ever filled to capacity is when there's something at the bandstand or a Saturday afternoon. During the week, it's barely 50% of capacity, and that 30% is probably people that are here in this building doing business, and they'll be in this business doing business.
I have not been convinced that we even need a parking garage. I mean, and same anecdotal driving around this year. I mean, there's always, except for Saturday of 4th of July weekend, there was always parking on my street. And I guess my question is, who is our customer? Is it for people going shopping downtown, or is it for beachgoers? Because I think there's always plenty of parking in town for beachgoers. I drove down Columbia and Henlopen today, and if we just enforced our right-of-way on the first block of Columbia and Henlopen, we'd end up with a whole lot more parking spaces. I mean, I think people get a pickup truck load of peach stone, throw it in front of their house and say, this is my parking. So, I mean, I know it's going to be unpopular, but there's ways that we can get more parking for beachgoers. I have a friend who owns a business on the second block of Rehoboth Avenue. He was all over Facebook about the price going up, and he said that's why there's plenty of parking on. There was a picture on yesterday of a bunch of spots on Rehoboth Avenue that were vacant, and he seems to think that it's because it's $4 an hour. And I was like, well, if we build this parking lot, price isn't going to go down. All right.
But we're on recording.
Okay.
I just wanted $3
Yeah,
an hour.
$3 an hour. I said the price isn't going to go down if we build this parking garage. So, you know, that's just some thoughts. I've not been convinced that we need a garage yet.
I will add about this parking lot, when we changed the facility, you used to be able to see the parking lot, and it was full. Now you really don't know, especially if you're new. The returns may be going around and finding Lake Avenue and coming in, but it's not, if you're just driving in,
Right.
it's not really identified as well as it could be. And I noticed when I come in off of Lake 2, it says Convention Hall parking. To me, that doesn't say public parking.
There is a sign
That's
now
my
that says
brain.
public.
Okay.
But this will be the same challenge that we have even if there's a deck there, is that the flow of traffic isn't the best, in that you can't go down and make a left-hand turn because of the no left turn. So you have to go all the way down around the bandstand to come up to get to it, unless you cut through the area that's, you know, for the fire. And I think a lot of people are hesitant to do that because I don't think they figured out that you were allowed to do that, but.
But Saturday nights it's full, so they do
Identification.
find it when they
Oh, yeah.
need to.
Right.
Saturday nights it's full.
Absolutely.
Is all of the wayfinding signage up now?
No, so that's one of the things I was going to bring up. I think that way they're still working to bring that forward. So the wayfinding will help. I think, you know, once we get that wayfinding signs in, that will bring more people to the parking lot that we have presently. That will help. Whether it will fill the parking lot, that remains to be seen. Again, we talked about it over and over again, and we know this. People do not like to walk. They want to, you know, I have seen, you know, folks parking in the 4th or 5th block of Rehoboth Avenue, and they trailer their stuff and their children and everything down. But they're few and far between. Most people want to be right where the beach access is.
And if I can,
Sharon-
Sharon, they're looking for long-term parking. That's the biggest complaint. They don't want to have to move their 3 hours
Long-term
wasn't enough.
parking.
Yeah, that was a concern. We're getting that at the VC.
Well,
They want-
and we.
So if the garage was long-term, I think that might be a.
And the lots long-term and the areas outside are long-term, and once we get a better
Yes,
signage program
yes.
to say, don't park on Rehoboth Avenue, that's not your long-term parking. Your long-term parking is, here, here, and here.
And that comes, that with the wayfinding, we have 1 mile of beachfront where people can park and access the boardwalk, and yet on the south end of town, you can go on any of those beach blocks with a permit and walk less than 2 blocks to the beach, and yet people don't know to do that. Very often, once you get past the second block, there's no one on those side streets that's using them for beach access instead of hauling them on Rehoboth Avenue. They don't know that they can go down to Norfolk and buy a parking permit and walk 3 blocks and they're at
And
the
I
beach.
don't think we can assume the garage will be long-term parking because we don't have control of it.
Oh, I
If they
know.
find they'll make more money hourly parking or 3-hour maximum or something, that's what they're going to do. We give up control if we go with as it's proposed by Colonial.
That's not necessarily true. We can put conditions, and they may not accept them, but we can put conditions in the operations into the contract. Is there no reason why we couldn't put operational conditions in?
Yes and no. I mean, you can put anything in. It's whether people accept it or not, whether they're willing to do a deal. But from an operational standpoint, I can't imagine, and again, if it was my garage and I was operating it, you would have a mix of long-term and short-term because that's what the market is. And so you don't fill it completely with long-term because you don't make as much money with the turnover, but you don't cut off that long-term parking because that's where the biggest demand is and that's where you can get a pretty good price. I mean, as Sharon said, people don't want to walk. So if they knew that they could pull in there and park for 8 hours and not have to go back and feed the meters, they're willing to pay a premium for that. So, to your point, Edward, yeah, we can tell them anything operationally, but the more you put in there, the less appealing it is to them, and the more they may want back from the city from a standpoint of, which has always been my thing, is what are both the hard and soft costs to the city?
So does it sound like a logical next step to compile this information and bring it forward to the commissioners to tell them where we are? And then possibly Commissioner Sheffer put some suggestions together as far as objectives.
Yeah, it was a rough start.
Yes, so no, but thank you for doing that. So this is what we spoke about before, objectives that need to be accomplished for this mobility center, parking garage. We can include some of that, or we can hold back if you wish and come up with a strategically set RFP to bring forward to the commissioners.
I think that we have enough information at this point to at least, I would hate to spend as much time to put a formal RFP and then have them say, boy, this infrastructure or this is an issue. So I think between what, the 3 of us met and Steve put together and a couple of comments, I'm interested to hear with the homeowners because I know, and some other input, plus what we've put here, I think is enough to go in front of them and say, do you still want us to pursue this?
Okay, does everybody agree?
Yes.
Okay, great. Great.
So who's going to compile this?
I think the committee, if you will, we have that subcommittee of Linda and
So
Commissioner Sheffer.
Sure, okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Is
we
that
had
good? And then
If everybody's comfortable
we
with
can
that.
circulate it, or we can have another meeting to approve that before we go before the commissioners?
Sounds.
Yes.
So you want another meeting before we go and
Or
we'll-
at least see it.
At least.
Okay, okay.
It would be helpful if all of us, even if it's transferred to us in written form, whatever the correct procedure is, it would be helpful if all of us at least know what's going before the
Oh, absolutely.
commission.
Oh, absolutely.
And a discussion
That's
of it.
that, yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. No, this is,
And a discussion of it
Yeah.
before it goes.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
I would recommend that we get it together before the next meeting, make that part of the next meeting, and then go from there.
And Sharon, is there any way to segregate the income that we're currently getting from the existing parking lot so that we know how much money we'd be losing per se? Or we would also know the occupancy rate in a sense, based on
Yeah, we
the
can.
occupancy this summer from the meter
Yes.
figures.
And that would be a question that, as a commissioner, would probably get asked, so that's probably an important thing.
That's one of my biggest concerns is the revenue that we would be losing for the 2 years it's being constructed, and then the decrease in revenue that we would otherwise be getting, that's gonna be, the new private company would be sharing some of that revenue.
Probably not for a while, so I mean,
Yeah.
typically, so I think whatever loss of revenue is in that lot is a long-term loss of revenue. It's not just during the construction, because if they're putting, and again, it all depends on how it's structured, but if they're putting all the money up to build it, and all the money up to operate it, and all the money up to maintain it, they're going reasonably to expect
All the money.
Return.
the return of the money.
All the money.
So that revenue sharing would come at some point after a break even, which, you know, could be years down the line. So I think when it's presented, we have to say, this is.
Is that your experience, that it is always, they're taking more upfront and the profit sharing is on the back
On the
end?
back end, if they're putting the money up front. I mean, if it's a 50-50, like we're both, you know, we're floating bonds, they're doing it, and so it all depends on the structure. But typically, if the majority of the monies, or in this case, probably most of the monies is coming from the private, then they're gonna expect that the revenue goes to them, because that's how they're gonna secure, you know, they're securing their loan based on that revenue stream.
Well, I think we need to take a close look at the loss of revenue then.
I think that's
You
an
know, when
important.
they came and made the presentation, Commissioner Sharp tried very hard to pin them down to how much, what percentage, what could we expect, and they wouldn't give a dollar. I mean,
Well,
they wouldn't make any comment
Yeah,
whatsoever on what income we would
in
expect.
reasonable, they didn't want to tip their hats to any, knowing that this was gonna go to public.
Would the convention center be able to be open for these 2 years while we're constructing the garage?
Well, we wouldn't want to close the convention center. We have, you know, bookings out. So we would not want to close the convention center. I mean, that's another
I think that's a
consideration.
mandate that needs to be in the RFP too, that it cannot disrupt the convention center.
You wouldn't have the parking.
Right. So, you know, it's the old, is this a temporary inconvenience for a permanent improvement, or is this a permanent inconvenience for a temporary improvement?
That's a good way to put it.
I would just suggest maybe the other thing the Parking Garage Committee may want to consider would be the issue with the city with the signage to get these people in these outer areas. And then reevaluate maybe where you're at as far as whether the need is for the parking garage to begin with. We really haven't been moved forward as far as advantageous to get the signage up to see where it's at that point. Because it'd be, you know, interesting is to put all the signs up and find out, oh, well, people actually are parking. We don't have the impact on the downtown as we did before. And we're spending, you know, we're about to venture into to a rabbit hole. So, I mean, I would just maybe float that out there, that maybe the city could consider the big push to get the signage up and get that. But I will say one thing, your signs for the meters, fantastic. You can, anywhere anybody goes, they know right now where to go, because all the new signage up for the meters, good job, good job.
Well, it took us a while. We have, you know, limited resources and staff, and they had to do everything else before they.
And I did a
So
good
it's
job.
it's a rolling,
Yeah, they did a good job.
you know, blend. of
Because there's
work,
no
so-
more anybody standing on the street going, where's the park,
Yeah.
where do I pay for
Exactly,
this?
exactly.
They see it and they're right there.
Right.
So, they did
To
a
your
good job.
point, though, I would say that I think these can go on dual tracks.
Okay,
And I say that because developing and putting out and receiving an RFP, you know, if we were ready today, we're, you know, to get it all done, it
Sure.
were 4, 5, 6 months. So
Yeah.
okay.
it would seem to me that if we're not expending resources, and what we're really expending is just time, which, you know, time is money, but that we could continue down developing it while we evaluate those things that happen, so that because if I recall, the RFP will not be a definitive, we're gonna do this, it's a, are you
There's
interested?
no obligation, we're just,
Right.
we're getting more information and data. And I completely agree, and I disagree with Linda all the time about perception is reality until we change perception, and the wayfinding signage is one way, social media is another way. to let people know that there is parking in the city.
I've never bought a parking permit, so, I live in town, but when people pull up to the people selling the parking permits, do they give them directions like, you could park on Second Block in Norfolk, you can park on I mean, that's just,
They give them a map when they stop,
Okay.
but if they don't stop, if they don't stop to buy a permit, they never get the map.
Okay.
They go into the visitor center, they get,
they get a map and
You
you,
get a map,
And
and
they
the
get
map's
the-
really nice, too.
you know, the highlighted, here's the
Yeah,
way to go.
Whoever did it did a great job.
I think our marquee might be something, I don't know the difficulty in that, Sharon, but the marquee would be, everybody looks at that marquee, and I don't know whether putting something up there, longer term parking, side streets, or with permit, you have to work out the quick words, but I think it's an opportunity we might be able to do without any expense.
Yeah.
I don't know the difficulty.
All of that is, yeah, I mean, great suggestions and everything. It's just a matter of who looks and what. On any given day, so now that July 4th is over, it's not certainly like after Labor Day, but, the crowds are here, but they're spread out more. So the push to get to July 4th and the fireworks display and that heated weekend, I mean, now everything is a little more, it gels a little better because not everybody's coming in for one particular day. So, and if you do look and you get to go around like I do, you see the parking, you see empty spots all over the city. So that's going to continue to be the argument. And we have a central location here for a parking garage if this would go forward. And certainly I think it would be used, but again, all of this, everything else that we're talking about, and the lost revenue for 2 years, and where we put the visitors to the convention center when people come here, that all has to be taken into consideration. And then think about, additional construction that's going to happen on Rehoboth Avenue in the future. We have proposals for hotels and, other reconstruction, so that all needs to be thought about and taken into consideration. So what I'm hearing is that we'll develop some formal RFP.
I thought we were just gonna put together the key facts and present them to the commissioners.
The key facts
Yeah,
and.
I mean, it'll be dual-purposed activities because a lot of the stuff that we're preparing for review by the mayor and the commissioners would go into the RFP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's right. So the objectives, everything that needs to be in there. So if they say yes, we'll be ready to go with that. And in the meantime, the three of us will meet and develop that and then come back to the whole group at the next meeting so we can be prepared then to go forward. So if we have the next meeting in August and get it on the commissioners' workshop, we can maybe move this forward in September, October, if they choose to do that.
I just have a request, if possible, to have whatever we will be looking at our August meeting prior to that meeting to be at least reviewed visually so that when we do come and discuss it, I'm a little bit more familiar with what we're discussing,
Oh,
just as you're.
That's,
Sure.
makes perfect sense.
Yep. Okay, we go on to new business. I think we kind of just
The only new business
Went through
that I
that.
have is the homeowners association had sent out just a very general notice that we were meeting and asked for feedback. And we got some feedback, and I asked Susan Gay to be with us today to present feedback, because she's the one that handled sending out the survey for us.
okay.
So,
Yes, thank you.
I feel like I'm on top of you guys up here. Just move this back slightly. Is it on?
Dan's not here.
Is it on?
Yeah.
I think it's on.
It's on.
I feel like this is a little anticlimactic based on everything we've learned this morning, but And as Mark said, it was a very general note, and we got only 6 responses, which I don't think indicates a lack of interest. I think people are distracted by the wastewater issue, which seems to be the #1 thing on their minds. And as we go forward and as there's more information, I think people will react more. So I'm glad that he suggested that, and I think people will want to be involved going forward. But of the 6 people we heard from, 4 were definitely against it, and 2 were all in favor of it. And there were some general themes throughout the responses. So that's I'm not going to. They were nice enough to give us detailed responses. So we got like a couple paragraphs from each person. It wasn't just yay or nay. So I'm just going to tell you a couple of the themes that came up. For those that have concerns about it or were against it, they said that the city was already very congested. They felt like there were safety issues. And there was plenty of parking already, and especially in the lot beside City Hall. Another fellow wanted very detailed usage data for this lot here. He said he walks through it all the time. He's only seen it full once. We've talked about that. He asked who was primarily advocating for it, and if it was the businesses that it should be built with no risk to residential taxpayers in the event of any project failure, lack of profit, or default on the loans. Another person said that he was concerned about the lack of research, which I know will come out of the RFP process, but that the focus on the urban core right here in the center of town might actually worsen the situation for people in traffic congestion, and that he favors a better distribution of parking throughout the city. And then, interestingly, one of the unique responses was from a guy who said that a quick fix could create long-term, even bigger congestion issues. And he asked us to envision a community that decides to add another lane to a highway. And in the short run, that provides relief. But later, you just have all the backup all over again in more lanes. So he asked us to keep that in mind. And the 2 people who were very much in favor said that the location was great. One person suggested adding a lot of greenery to it. I know that a lot of parking garages in Florida have that. I've seen people have sent me so many pictures of these beautiful parking garages in Florida with greenery all over them. So they said if we do that, we should try to maximize that. Another person said makes perfect sense and would profit the local businesses because their customers can't find parking. She loved the great central location. So I would just add, my own thought to that is I'm a big believer in the wayfinding. I think the signs look great now. I have always thought that if we maximize that, it might provide some answers, and it might provide a lot of help to people. And the last thing is, you mentioned the hotel garages. I do think it's interesting to note that with the 3 hotels coming in, by code would already be providing more than the number of parking spaces that are planned for this garage. So it's really a doubling when you count the hotels.
Right, thank
So,
you.
thanks.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other citizen comment? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I'm Carol Warner, and I live at 113 St. Lawrence. I'm 2 doors from John. And we can tell how crowded the beach is by how many people are on our street, how far down the cars come. My biggest concern, my husband's concern, is the individual cost of a parking space. And he has been in that business all his life, and not specifically parking. But what it's going to cost to build that garage, are you getting those numbers from the person who's going to build the garage? Do we have any independent person who has no profit motive behind it to analyze the need for the garage and the cost of it? And he thinks that is incredibly important. Because if we're talking about this, the profit being way down the road, that road keeps going, and before you see anything of it. And
I mean, I can address the cost. It's a standard number in the industry at this point, and a lot of factors go into it, but you can address about $20,000 a space.
he thinks 50.
No.
Yeah.
No.
And he
I've been
says
doing
you
this
need
for
1,100,
5
you need 104 days a year with complete capacity to break even.
I've done a cost analysis, but now the 20,000 a space doesn't take into account some of these other issues that we talked about. So, the infrastructure might take it up to 30,000 a space. If you want great facade and you want all these other things that you don't want infrastructure, you could have, so the baseline when you're planning a garage is 20,000 a space. You're gonna go up or down based on what you come up with. 50,000 is almost unheard of unless it's A, underground, and B, one of the huge architectural, like we have a design thing every year in the industry where people show off their facilities. And when they bring up the 50,000 of space garages and 60,000, everybody gasps because they're like the most beautiful building you could ever see. So I don't mean to whatever, but you know, there's issues, but 20, 30, you know, isn't unreasonable. I think that any company that's coming in is doing their numbers because they built them to know that that's probably what it's going to be. But when you add all this stuff up, they'll make a determination whether it's even worth it.
And I think that's the whole thing, is it worth it? You know, who actually is going to use it? And that's major. I do think we have a lot of beach parking. I think it can be improved. We talked about that at the parking meeting. Just down King Charles Street, you know, there's plenty of angle parking you put there. And other places, get rid of those right-of-ways. They don't belong to the people. Put parking there. There's all kinds of things like that. So I think the need for it is the major consideration. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Chuck Snyder. I'm the fire chief. I'm a 45-year member next door. I'm also a native of Rehoboth Beach. I've lived there all 64 years of my life. Leonard is also a life member of the fire company, 40-plus years. We got a couple things we'd like to bring up to you. I'm going to actually turn over to Leonard, not to go away from Kent and John because they are our representatives. We had a meeting Wednesday night. We needed to talk to them about a couple things that we have concerns about, basically some access concerns. So let Leonard go ahead and speak, and we apologize for not getting that to John.
No, thanks, sir.
Morning. The couple of issues we have are access.
What's your name, sir?
Oh, sorry. Leonard Tylecki, representing Rehoboth Fire Company, 233 Rehoboth Ave, or excuse me, 219 Rehoboth Avenue. Also property owner at 233 Rehoboth Avenue. The water service to our building is 6-inch service fed from the backside of the building off the 10-inch water line that comes from 2nd Street to the side street here, and we forgot that on the mapping. That's an access problem to us where we would be impacted during construction. Our electric meter reads is on the back side of the building. If you are building close to the line, which I assume you will be to get the most space, that will have to be relocated on our building. Our antenna tower out back, which is normally, maintenance is normally done by climbing, but as it gets covered in with buildings on 2 sides of it, that would require us to have crane access if we had to replace or add anything to it. Also, our fire sirens back there, and we don't climb that. We have to use an aerial type device to get to that. So again, that would be a problem for us to either relocate it one side of the building or the other. Our oil tank is back there between the tower and the offset in our building, 2,000-gallon oil tank. So we would have to bring oil delivery would have to come through the front of the building at that point if you built to the line, but we couldn't get to it. So that's another issue for us. I think I got everything, but that's the 4 things we had that I want to bring up. Okay.
Just a question, are all of those things that you just listed on your property?
Yes, I'll accept a little bit of the foundation of the antenna tower encroaches over on the city, and the city is well aware of that.
Okay.
That was put in 1987.
So you're saying by virtue of putting a structure on that facility, those areas would be blocked?
Correct. Access to those would be blocked.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else from the public? Okay, we're backing up to another meeting here scheduled at 10 a.m. So we set a date for the next meeting. Again, we usually have these on a Friday. Friday, August 9th, is that,
I'm not good.
No, I'm good.
I'm okay on the 16th.
I am too.
Yeah, 16's fine.
16th is okay?
I can do the 16th, but I think maybe Susan could fill in for me, so that'll be fine. Can you
Okay.
fill in on the 16th of August for me for the homeowners association?
I don't know.
All right, well, we'll work it out, that's fine
Okay.
without me.
August 16th at 9 a.m.
Okay.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you. Meeting is adjourned.
Thanks.
so much.
Yep.